In today's video I talk about intramuscular cysts of the rotator cuff muscles and their relationship with tears. So we are talking about findings like this one here in this shoulder MRI, a proton density weighted sequence, and we have this cyst here in the supraspinatus muscle. They are also known as Sentinel Cysts. And why Sentinel? Because if you have a cyst like this, you should really be looking for a tear of the rotator cuff tendons. So what basically is happening, you have a tear of the rotator cuff tendon that can be a articular-sided partial tear or a bursa-sided partial tear or even a full thickness tear. And you have fluid from the joint or the bursa entering the tear and then delaminating through the tendinous substance medially into the muscle and then collecting here and forming a cyst there. And therefore it's a sentinel, or it's a finding that should prompt a thorough search, as they always write in all these publications, a thorough search for a rotator cuff tear. See a cyst, think rotator cuff tear. There are not too many publications that are dealing with this entity, and they are already pretty old. You can see here over 10 years old in HER. The clinical significance of these cysts of the rotator cuff and their relationship with full thickness or partial thickness tears, and the conclusion is here that there is a relationship between these cysts and the tears, and that the tears can either be full thickness or partial thickness in a relatively equal proportion. So it doesn't only have to be with partial thickness tears if you see these cysts. Here in an even older study in 2005, also intramuscular cyst and the association of tears with these cysts. And similar conclusion here, strongly associated with tendon tears, so the cysts are strongly associated with rotator cuff tears. So if you see a cyst, go look for the rotator cuff tear. So this was the initial example that I have shown you. This is the cyst here in the supraspinatus muscle here. And if you look closely, you can see we have from the cyst here a tiny fluid streak going laterally. Here is a second component of that sentinel cyst, and then we kind of lose it here because we have thick slices. But let's have a look at the sagittal view. Again, this is a proton density weighted sequence after arthrography. Therefore we have this extravasation here at the typical location. So we have the cyst in the supraspinatus muscle, as you can appreciate here very well. And if you go laterally right now, we can see this is this tiny street, tiny neck of this intramuscular cyst going laterally along the central tendon component here. This is the second component or the second cyst that we saw. And then it's going here into the tendon substance. Now here on this slice we kind of lose it, but then here we can see there is some signal changes in the tendon, and then here is a tear of the supraspinatus tendon at the posterior portion of the tendon, and the most lateral or superficial bursa-sided tendon fibers are intact here. This is the tear, therefore we have a articular-sided partial thickness tear with this extension with a delaminating component and then extension of fluid through this delaminating tear reaching far deep into the muscle. This here is a T1 weighted fat saturated sequence after arthrography, therefore we have hyperintense signal intensity or gadolinium inside the joint, and you can see that the gadolinium is reaching here into the tear, into this partial thickness tear, articular-sided, and we cannot really see the contrast here in the cyst. But don't get fooled by this, because if you have fluid here and it's like a cul-de-sac, then you don't expect the intra-articular fluid to go in here, because that would need time and to mix these two different fluid components. But you can nicely see how it's extending here inside the partial thickness articular-sided tear and then some delaminating component here. Before we move on, just a quick shout out to my two newest patrons, that is Gorge and Tyler. Hi guys, thanks for your support, and also thank you to all my other patrons that are continuing supporting my channel here, and you can see the full list here on your screen. If you want to know more about Patreon and how you can support this channel, go check the link in the description down below, or the one that is just showing here on the screen. Patreon is a great way and a great platform to support content creators just as myself. As you can see here on the home page, you can select the membership level, how much you want to pledge, and you get different benefits out of it. For the $10 pledge, you even get a free copy of my book. Once you have an account, you will get access to exclusive posts and exclusive videos, just as the one here released today as well, the Journal Club for February 2020. I do a Journal Club once every month where I go through a few publications in a rapid fire session. You can vote for topics for me to cover, etc., etc. This is the second case, and you can also immediately see on this proton density weighted fat saturated image here that we have some hyperintense signal changes here along the central tendon here of the supraspinatus here. So this changes here reaching for medially into the muscle belly itself. And then we have this delaminating tear component here reaching up to the anterior border of the supraspinatus tendon. And then here we have the tear at the anterior border. Sometimes it's better seen on the sagittals here. Now, if you see here, you can nicely see this cyst, this sentinel cyst here along the tendon. And then it's coming down here. Then here it has different components. This is a delaminating tear in the tendon substance. So this is the main tendon here, that's the tear. And then we have a focal defect here. It's either a very high grade partial thickness tear, articular-sided, or maybe even a small full thickness tear. You can probably argue in both directions, because you might say that there might still be some fibers here that are in continuation. But then again here it's even more difficult. And on our sagittal view here, on these 3mm slices, it's really hard to say whether there is some bursal layer still intact or not. So what did we learn this week? Basically two things. If you see a cyst in the rotator cuff muscles, go check the tendons, because there is a high probability that there is a rotator cuff tear. Sometimes they are not so obvious. It can be full thickness tears, but it can also be partial thickness tears in an equal distribution. Then have two differentials in your mind. First of all, it can be a labral ganglion cyst, which might be pretty big and in a similar location, although they typically are not, or are usually not, intramuscular, but they can be at the level of the suprascapular notch or the sphenoglenoid notch. So have that in mind as a differential diagnosis. And the second differential diagnosis would be a myxoid tumor. They can have a very cystic appearance, and don't just fall for a sentinel cyst if you have something that looks a little bit odd and have at least a tumor or a cystic or myxoid tumor in your differential, because the outcome and treatment is substantially different, and we need to make this distinction as radiologists. That's it for this week. Thanks for watching. If you have any comments, comment below. I answer all your questions there, and also give the video a like and subscribe, and see you next week.